a bunch of dudes passed out in front of NFL football upstairs.
Cool. I think we got everything running. Let's do a podcast. Let's do it.
They don't know what I know.
Hey, welcome back for another episode of Zengineering. I think we're up to episode 6 now.
6? I think this is 6. Thank you for the welcome back.
I'm Adam.
I'm Brian.
What? So six is like, it feels like we're over a sort of a hump. But I was trying to think of like a nerdy numeric way to refer to it, but I don't really.
It's half of 10.
You can't stack it symmetrically in the fridge.
You can't stack 10. Yeah, interesting.
The fact that my brain even went there reveals something about me personally. I'm frustrated when things aren't stacked symmetrically in fridges.
You know, I learned a long time ago that lining up your labels helps a lot as well with that disorder. And so if you go in and spin everything so labels are facing forward, you'll feel even better.
But do you not know what it is from its physical appearance?
You do, but when you look in there, your eyes just say, that looks nice. Someone lined up all the labels.
This is so. I don't know how much you want to talk about.
I do that kind of thing
personal life kind of stuff. But I saw your girlfriend posting things about. Oh, I can't remember her name, so that makes this a useless thing for the podcast. But there's some woman who has this whole like theory of organization that's all about like hold up a thing, and if it doesn't bring you joy, throw it away.
I really dig it. I've been trying it with some stuff around the house, and I mean the way it's presented is a little goofy, but it's true. I can pick anything out of my closet, and I'd be like, yeah, this sucks. This should go away. Right. And other things like, man, I think
that's just a mode of reducing clutter, and that's where the satisfaction comes from. I think any motivation to, like, I get the same feeling from just like, well, I don't really need that, but I don't need to look at it and go, does this bring me exultant joy? Otherwise, it's gone.
Maybe you should.
Maybe
next week when you're scoping the old milk in the fridge that's a little off center and not stacked properly, you give it that sniff test and it's no good. You might want to hold it close before you throw it out,
because that milk might bring me joy.
Mix it with some chocolate; it definitely will.
That said, I have a lot of random junk around my house that exists only because it brings me joy.
Actually,
stupid nerdy figurines and things.
I have a lot of stuff that most people would consider trash for sure.
Yeah, totally.
Definitely all brings you joy, though.
My wife absolutely does. Why does that need to be there? Like, because it's a Lego Mars rover. It reminds me that there's a robot just up there cruising around on a planet so far away from us.
Living in the future, my friend.
It's important to remember. Okay, so what do we got this week? What's the big one?
We are going to talk about fantasy role-playing games this week. And I think a lot of our listeners...
Let's be real. Dungeons and Dragons.
A lot of our listeners are going to go there only, Adam. But I think we're going to touch on all realms of creative, collaborative games where you're imagining being something else. And I don't want to spoil...
Well, here's why this is a cool one to me. Because we regularly, the fact that I used to play Dungeons and Dragons, which I used to do with you... I don't know, 6th grade through the end of high school, probably.
I don't like to say the end of high school. That's embarrassing.
No,
and I don't really think we were playing then either.
It petered off for sure. But I did play, and people usually sort of want to laugh at it. But it's interesting to me because what I tend to think, though, is we uniquely, as a whole generation, like, we grew up along with the advent of video games.
Yeah.
And so, like, there was a time for us when we didn't have Nintendo. Like, to play a game, we had to make it up ourselves.
Yeah.
And so we did. But it was sort of associated with this culture. Like, so Dungeons and Dragons was really, really involved. And so it became that, like, I'm going to play Dungeons and Dragons, blah, blah. And everybody, like, The Simpsons make fun of it and shit. But everyone who wrote for The Simpsons played Dungeons and Dragons when they were a kid. So
I find as I get older, more and more people seem to have played Dungeons and Dragons when they were kids. could be my selective choice of people that I spend time with, or it could just be people a little more comfortable with the fact
No,
that they
I pay a lot of attention to this because I feel
fantasized.
like I have for many years carried the baggage of the time that I used to spend playing Dungeons and Dragons.
It's a proud badge, my friend.
And I've realized exactly that it's more like this proud badge of the number of successful people I encounter that played Dungeons and Dragons when they were younger is remarkable.
I
these
know
days.
a dark elf thief that lives down the street from me who really enjoyed playing when he was younger, and there's a wizard around the corner who really nice guy.
Chaotic
I don't
good.
think he casts too many spells anymore, but he's getting up there in wizard age. So let's before we dive into the topic too much, let's do a couple little hit list items. Some fun stuff from the week. What's on there that interests you?
I let my iPad lock, but as soon
Oh,
as I bring it up,
stretching feels good.
we can.
I'm sitting today, for all of those of you who are wondering if I'm standing like a champion usual. I'm not, because I have overexercised this week.
I'm usually sitting, and I'm trying to stand this week because I feel like my energy is better, which
See,
sounds
the
like a
world
really
is
obnoxious thing to
always
say. I think my
balance.
energy is better.
but just better for
But
yourself.
it's
And things are balanced. See,
keeps me
you're
awake.
standing, I'm sitting.
Honestly, it's because my chair is creaky and I don't want to fuck up the audio. So it's for you, dear listener, that I am currently standing on my feet.
My chair is very quiet, surprisingly. All right, hit list. What's up there?
You're sitting on a throne. Don't they call that? Isn't that your drum chair? Which
no, I'm
they
actually
call
sitting
a
on my
throne?
keyboard seat.
Oh, okay.
But yes, they do call the drum chair the throne, which always makes me think of the bathroom.
Oh, I was.
Because some people
it
call
made
the
me think
toilet
of
the
royalty.
throne.
It's like maybe it's just to make the drummer feel a little better because he's very important, but he's in the back and no one notices.
Incredibly important.
Wild haired
and pop song without drums. That ain't no pop song.
Okay, I'm gonna pull one from the hit list that you put on here.
Cool.
Legos to explain fractions, and there's a link that goes with this. I saw it just in a passing headline and looked at it, but I don't know exactly what is it.
It's cool. It was just a post. I think it was a high school teacher or middle school teacher, whoever you teach fractions to kids, probably even younger than that. She was using Legos to demonstrate fractions, and I just thought it was a really cool hands-on method. And so, if you imagine like the classic 8-point Lego brick, like the little brick that has 8 little
8x2
things on
they
top,
call it,
or 2x4. It's got in any size. All those little Lego bricks stack up and create whole pieces. So you could take like a 2x4 piece and you could do quarters and break it down into those little 2x1 pieces, 4 of them, and you can literally stack them on there and see the fraction create a whole. Or you could break it down into ones, into eighths. You could break it down into halves with the little 2x2s. And all the Lego pieces stack up that way. You can get out to the 8x2, the 16x2. The abstract parts don't work. Like every Lego kit these days doesn't really have those bricks anymore, but the old original pieces, I thought, what a creative way to use Legos. And then I started thinking, you probably get that. You're kind of intuitively learning fractions when you play with Legos. And it made me start to think about toys and games and how you can kind of you're not necessarily, kids aren't sitting there thinking, oh, I need the half of a 4x2 piece. You need the 2x2 piece, but you intuitively are picking up the concept of
we need
mathematics.
the piece that fits in that slot, right? Which is what's interesting about mathematics and fractions and things like that, right? And like when you present it in a purely mathematical sense, it's super dry. Well, 1/2 plus 1/2 is a whole, but like in the real world, that's really, in that Lego sense. Oh, well, I don't have, it makes me think of when I would build stuff frequently, I would turn out to not have the right piece, or I would have lost a piece, or my dog would have chewed up a piece. And it was like, okay, I need the fat 2x4 piece, but I can't find one because those ones are nice to chew on for dogs, right? Like I could see in my head just one of those with a dog bite mark in the side of it.
Oh, yeah.
Like, shit, I can't use this.
I had a lot of human bite marks in mine, too.
But you can stack 3 of the thinner 2x4s to make one of those pieces. So I've many times in my childhood of going, oh, nice. Shit. Oh, but I can build this out of the component pieces that I have. And what's interesting there is like when they start building more complicated things, like I reposted a thing the other day that was this cute little like frame by frame sort of pictograph story of a Wall-E figure building a Lego Wall-E, and then the
That's
Wall-E,
adorable.
like, oh, totally adorable. But the Lego Wall-E kind of had that like Minecraft look about it, where it's sort of blocky, but it's still made up of those pieces. And so by the limitation of having to use this sort of crude geometry with Legos to build things, you can still make approximations of the world around you. They're just constrained by less fractal and less complicated geometry.
Right.
But you can still kind of build these things. And so it's a really like, it's an interesting way to visualize, how would I make this thing out of blocks? And you can see it starts like, for me, starting from that place and then building like explaining it in terms of math and fractions. And then I hope that teacher continued into making more complex things, because you can get from that 1x1 block as a component of the 2x6 block to how that's the Eiffel Tower, like pretty quickly, and in a way that I think would open up kids to seeing the link between math and the real world, which is something that I don't feel like I wrapped my head around till I was like 28. Like I didn't understand until my mid-20s that math is what you need to make a rocket work. No one had ever explained it.
No one's actually counting bushels of apples right now, you know? So if Johnny has 2 apples and I take one away, nobody fucking cares.
Right.
I only get 1 apple in my lunch, okay? I get 1 sandwich, 1 apple, 1 juice box, and maybe some chewy dessert pieces.
Well, how many apples can I trade you for those chewy dessert pieces? Those shark bites?
It would take an infinite number of apples. I'll trade for an infinite number of apples for my shark bites with the gooey center.
And there we have the obesity epidemic personified. No, you can't have my shark bites.
That apple has naturally occurring sugar in it. Cool. That's a good one. Legos. Yeah. Legos are freaking dope.
I want to start with role playing, but I want to start at something that a whole lot more people understand, which is fantasy football.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, I don't really understand this topic, so you'll have to guide me a little bit.
I don't entirely either, but what I do understand about the dynamics is you, at the beginning of the season, pick players to be on a fabricated team, and you can pick players from any team across the league, but you're drafting your like dream team of players.
And you build out a real team, right?
Right.
So if it's baseball, you're drafting pitchers and batters. Are people going to stop listening to our podcast because I'm so ignorant about fantasy sports?
I don't think so.
I sure hope not.
It's okay. But you're on the right track. And so you build out a team, and then you get points every week based on how those people perform in their respective games every week. And then based on those points, you have a ranking within your league for how your fake team made up of superstars is doing. And so for a lot of people, a lot of research goes into this because they want to make sure that they have the right people to fill in the right gaps. Absolutely. And they're building out a well-rounded team. It's like putting together an investment portfolio of how you think you're going to do the best. And they do a lot of research on that because they want to know how this guy's doing, whether he's injured, whether that's going to matter. Because if you have a guy on your team who's then injured, he's just out and you're stuck with him all season, sitting on a bench, getting you no points.
I see a lot of my friends go to incredible lengths and invest a lot of really high level thought into every decision they make. I mean, they're putting together incredible Excel spreadsheets. People are picking up new statistical methods to analyze their teams. It's an interesting phenomenon because it's one of those areas where there doesn't seem to be as much fact as everyone wants. I know baseball is a little different than some sports, but some sports, you don't know if someone's going to get injured. You don't know how someone's going to perform. You don't know how teams are going to play against each other. And so everyone's got an opinion, and there's not really a way to prove someone else's opinion wrong other than to play the season out and see who wins. And so it's cool. It motivates everyone to make up their own mind, which I think is what makes sports so engaging for a lot of people. It's that debate. It's that constant debate without really being able to win an argument, you know?
Right.
Which frustrates me, but...
So the fantasy thing, it scratches, I think, the same itch for the people that are really into fantasy football in the way that me and you don't really understand. I think it scratches exactly the same itch that Dungeons and Dragons did for us when we were in 7th grade.
You get to be something that you really love and admire and respect and study all the time. For us it's wizards.
us,
For other
it's
people, it's like
wizards.
the GM of a football team. Because
but
that's
but
where
no,
fantasy sports
it's
get
the
really
same.
cool for me.
It's the same level of involvement, and it's all built around imagining that you're this certain thing, and going more than just like a couple layers deep into that world. And
Right.
so that's where, like earlier I mentioned video games. What's interesting to me is we've grown up at the same time of like people realizing that this role playing thing was good and then slowly chipping away elements to see what the least effort they could put in, the least creative effort they had to put in order to scratch that itch while still getting the buzz. And so video games have progressively, like, you have to think creatively less and less in order to play Metal Gear Solid because you just do the missions. But you're still role playing. You're still pretending to
Right.
be that guy and completing missions, and
Yeah.
everybody loves it.
Yeah, I mean, they've kind of taken the approach that anything that becomes a commoditized product is, which is how do you appeal to the masses the most and how do you make something the most addictive, which is what we've done a pretty good job. Not that there isn't, I mean, video games are tremendous art. I think video games make more money than movies now. They're the biggest creative
Oh yeah, I'm
outlet
not
on the
trying to
planet.
knock
It's the
video
biggest,
games.
but
I'm just trying to walk it back from something that
For
a
sure.
lot of people like to the thing that we liked as children, and we still when we talk to one another long for the enjoyment of those Dungeons and Dragons games at
every
that time in our
second
life.
of every day, I think about or am actively talking to someone about the
How
the
you wish we
pleasant
could pull
and
together a
functional
competent.
experience of
But
playing fantasy
so-
role playing games as a child.
So one time we did, we tried to pull together a Dungeons and Dragons game,
This
and it
was
was
great.
eye
I
opening.
was just talking about this last night. Incredibly,
we
a defining moment as
it
an
was
adult.
really eye opening because we pulled together like friends. It was mostly I came down to visit you, and you pulled together people that you talked to about Dungeons and Dragons down there.
Yeah, 8 or 10 people, I think.
And we tried to play a game, and it made me realize that like there are so many also different styles of play and different levels of involvement. And so in a minute we'll walk through like how we used to play Dungeons and Dragons. But what was funny about this was like we it was kind of an unsuccessful session. It was because one guy that came out, Lou, was
the only other person who had played for real.
right,
I think,
who had played for real, was so, and I mean this admirably, like he was
I loved it.
so into it in a role playing way that all the rest of us couldn't handle it.
Short
because
of
everyone else there played in a way where it was very like, let's talk
Cerebral.
through this scenario, but we're going to talk like it's me and you talking, trying to figure out a scenario. Lou was like embodying that character.
He killed it.
And so when you said that we walked up to a troll standing at a bridge, like my response is to be like, okay, does the troll look friendly? And Lou's response was to be like, yon troll who standeth upon the bridge in the way of my travel.
How are thee today?
Dost thou have upon thee?
I was not prepared.
We all just started laughing.
Yeah. I really enjoyed, there was way more humor in that session than I remember there being as a child. Although there was definitely a lot of humor in it too as a kid.
So let's go. So let's take it back a bit and talk through, for the people that don't exactly know what we're talking about when we talk about something like Dungeons and Dragons or a role playing game in the sense that we're talking about, we were into.
Oh, because everyone has a different view of what that is if they've never played, or even if they have played. There are tons of different versions of role playing.
And a lot of people probably have this sort of the baggage of like wizards' cloaks and LARPing and
Yeah, which is cool too, but different.
So you have role playing, like, so our childhood Dungeons and Dragons session would usually be in someone's basement or someone's bedroom, and everybody's sitting around, and you have a dungeon master. Talk me through the responsibilities of the dungeon master.
Actually, let's go. Can we go back a little bit further even and just describe real quickly like what is available to make the game? The game is book based in the traditional way, and so you have these books that you can call them rule books, but more so they do have a lot of kind of rules, like flexible metrics by which the game is operated. but really they just kind of they tell you how to be creative. The books say like, hey, think about if when you're creating a character and they're out on the road traveling with a bunch of gear, think about how they'll get tired. Will they get tired over time? Don't let characters carry too much stuff. Like, think about relationships of buying things
Well,
and
in that
living and
sense, they do what I
surviving.
was just talking about with the video games, which is they provide a level of like, so if you were to just take unbridled imagination and like, oh, so here's a place to go with it. Think about games in general, right? Any game, chess, checkers, boxing, like you have to make up a set of. I had an ex-girlfriend
framework.
once who completely didn't understand football, and she thought it was just silly. And I would say, "Oh, but," and I would explain the rule to her. She would say, "Well, why did that just happen? That's dumb." And I'd say, "Well, because," and I would explain the rule, and she would say, "Yeah, but I still don't understand it." And it was like that really made it clear to me that like, or not clear, but like that was the first time that I was just like, "You're right. This shit's just made up. Like it's
Right.
just completely arbitrary, like limitations that everyone agrees to in order that we can have an amusing pursuit."
Well, the cool thing with Dungeons and Dragons is it does that, but and when I'm talking about Dungeons and Dragons, I'm talking about all manner of. There were tons of role playing games like this, but
Right. But
D&D
what
was
we
a more
played the
popular one.
deepest, we tried a bunch. We played Heroes for a while. We played a Star
Hmm.
Wars role playing game for a little while. That
Yeah,
one was real
and we've
cool.
got into tabletop games and card games
Warhammer.
uh, and they all a lot of them come back to Dungeons and Dragons, especially because it's so broad. It defines a framework for thinking about reality. Actually, it's fantasy, but it's how do you imagine being someone else, and how do you create a world for someone else to exist in, and then how do you make that reality interesting to people? Uh,
Well, and the easiest way to
which
then plug a bunch of people into it so that you can cooperate and play is
Mhm.
to just have a book that lays out a certain set of constraints. Here's this type of character. Here's what they're like. Like, so in that sense, they've covered a little bit of the imagination for you.
Yeah,
And by doing that,
and
they let the imagination go into what happens in the quests. Like,
right,
you don't have to think about what your
and
character
thinking,
looks like quite as hard because you pick a race and
yeah, you
you
kind of
pick
define some
attributes,
stuff.
and then they're kind of set.
It guides you through. I always like to talk about uh, fantasy role playing, this sort of cerebral fantasy role playing, as group storytelling. There's a dungeon master, to kind of get back to your question that prompted this. There's a dungeon master who runs the game. In a lot of role playing games, they're called the game master. And they run the game in the sense that they kind of guide the story. They typically had read some of the deeper books that really described, hey, how do you operate games well? How do you facilitate group conversations? Like, that's not the framework. That's like what a business book would call it, but that's what they were doing. And then the game master guides the world, and you kind of feed off your players. You take them on an adventure. You talk about what's going on. You run into problems and triumph, and there's reward, and there's magic, and there's consumption, and there's learning, and but really it's just people kind of talking through an interesting uh fantasy time together. You're talking through a chapter of a book as a team, and writing something together. It's it just I
Well,
feel so
so
good when I talk about it.
so the dungeon master, basically, well, so you have the dungeon master and then you have the characters, and each character is in our case we used to make new characters pretty freely just because we were sort of spastic, but there are a lot of cases where people commit to these characters for a really long
Yeah,
time and they continue to
years and
develop
years.
them. But
Yep.
you make that character based on the rules that are in the book, and you make that character by you pick a race, and those races have certain attributes, and then you pick like a main talent, and those all have certain attributes, and then
Mm-hmm.
you figure out what like scale of those attributes you're starting with by rolling dice. Right, this is where the dice part comes into it. That's always part of the lore of Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing games. So without a computer or a video game or programmers or whatever to pick which part of it is going to be out of your control, the thing that these role-playing games did is they created this universe, but then they also built in this component where a certain part of it's out of your control. And that's the part with the dice. So even when you make a character, you just roll based on certain parameters that they gave you to figure out what your attributes are, what your strength is going to
Right, things
be,
like
how many
yeah,
hit points you're going to have before you die, how dexterous you are, how good you look, like things like that. Like literally, there were values for
That is a
charisma.
category.
And if your charisma was higher, you had a
It's not just
modifier on a
appearance,
roll
Adam.
to like try to talk to somebody into not mugging you, which was like a thing you could try. You run into some bandits on the road, you can try to make friends with them. And if your charisma is
if you
higher,
were-
you have a better chance.
If you were a bard or a thief or any sort of performer in a role playing game, charisma was your most important characteristic. If you were a warrior, you always put your worst roll on charisma because you didn't care if the orc liked you. You were
Your
stabbing
job
him
was
in
to
the face.
just beat people up. Yeah. But so those are the characters, right? And each one has different stuff. And ideally you try to build out a well-rounded party, much like you would with a fantasy sports game.
Yeah.
And then the dungeon
absolutely.
master is the one who's going to guide you through everything. So that's the person that understands the world. And so they know like what creatures you're going to run into, what the main goal of the quest is, and talks you through everything and basically plays usually like the bad guy side of everything. So they control the creatures, they control the limitations, they control all that kind of stuff. And
monsters. And sometimes other characters that like play on your team too.
right.
Non-player characters, they were called.
And so then you all sit around, and in the universe of the dungeon master's sort of creation and guidance, you basically just play a video game, but it's all in your imagination. And so it'll start with him saying like, your party has assembled and you're standing before a sign, a wanted poster. And then you just have to, and so like somebody from your party's got to go, okay, I'm going to go read the poster. What does the poster say? And then he tells you what the poster says. And you talk your way through creating this story that exists only in your imagination, right?
I have some pre-made adventures I could go read from right now, and we could play for 5 minutes.
You
Just
don't
to
have
give people a sense.
You also have adventures that weren't just like, because you can get pre-made ones that have grids
these are ones I wrote,
and dice and stuff.
Yeah,
you have a couple that like you made from scratch on graph paper because you were
tons.
DMing that were really impressive.
Well, that was the cool part about both DM and the characters. You could spend days. This is what made getting a group of people who hadn't played together to play hard. You can't just open the box like you can to play Monopoly and look at the rules real quick. It would take days to put a character together. You could peruse through books for hours and hours and read about the history of dwarves and how they were the mining creatures in the world, and how they were the size and shape and strength and type of character they were because of the history of the race, and then how their race interacted with humanoids and elves. And you would spend all this time learning about this stuff to fantasize about, well, what do I want to be? And then the dungeon master did the same thing for the world. They would create, hey, here's what my world's like. These are the types of creatures in it. This is the type of adventure. There's going to be fire or water or lots of spells or undead and vampires and ghosts. And oh man,
kind of like the idea of an open world video game where you can go do whatever you want. Like video games have been striving as computing power increases to let you interact with the entirety of that world, whether it's constructive for the mission or not. And in Dungeons and Dragons, because it's entirely in your imagination, like you could, go back to that wanted poster that I was talking about, right? Like if you had this jokester bard in your party who like, that was his thing, he could be like, I'm going to take out my grease pencil and draw a dick on the poster. And the DM goes, okay. And if you have a really clever DM, maybe 2 days later in your campaign, that comes back and some gang of thieves is like, are you the guy that drew the dick on the poster? Roll a die to see if they think that's funny or if they're angry at you.
Yeah.
And
then even the DM had that role of luck in what they were doing.
And so it could be like really infinitely. So here's where it gets to the success thing, though. There was this problem solving factor where the DM would just present you with the details he or she thought you needed in order to figure out what the thing you had to do was. But you still, in this completely open universe of imagining it basically from whole cloth, had to figure out what your next move was.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we would bumble around doing dumb shit until we figured out, like, oh, under the bridge. Okay, I found it.
Yeah, it was up to the DM to decide how much do I want to guide them, how much do I want them to figure out on their own.
They just have to
and
walk around and bump their head on things until they notice the shiny thing under the bridge. That's the key that they needed to unlock the gate or whatever,
Okay, so I found a good little passage I'm gonna read. It's a couple paragraphs.
Did you
and it's a
type
cool,
this yourself, or is it pre-made?
I wrote this.
Okay.
So this was in a, this will give a little context, actually, kind of how the talk goes and stuff. So I wrote this as a dungeon master for an adventure I was building in the world called Ravenloft. And Ravenloft was kind of the dark, the ghosty world. There were ghosts and vampires and werewolves, and that's kind of where I always was drawn. It was spooky. It still was generally the same time setting of like swords and magics and castles. Some of the other worlds were more common that you picture, like Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones style worlds. There were even worlds that were like, there was one called Spelljammer that was ships flying through outer space. So it went all over the place.
Ravenloft was kind of like Castlevania. I feel
Yeah,
like.
Castlevania.
The
That's
video
good. Or
game.
like Dracula movies
Yeah.
and stuff. So this was a adventure I put together, and I'm holding a binder right now that probably has 100 pages. Lots of typed stuff that was like pre-made stuff I'd read. It has maps. It has character sheets of its own that are characters from the adventures. It has histories of parts of the towns and places they would go. It's just really interesting. And so this is the section. I just kind of open it up, and this is labeled Encounter 1. So this probably lines up with some map. There's probably a little mark on it that says 1. And this is what I read to friends. And I remember reading this. I remember I had candles lit. We were playing in my room, and it was kind of dark. I don't remember who we were playing with, but here we go. Encounter 1. And it wouldn't be presented that way. It would be in the context of the story. So you've been walking along a well-used path for several hours without the slightest sign of anything. Every once in a while, you hear the beginnings of a scream that are muffled before they reach their full intensity, but nothing more interesting than that has happened. Suddenly, you hear a very intense groan fairly close to your location. A few minutes later, a low, constant thud sounds in the distance. It reminds you of the noise a butcher makes when beating a freshly slaughtered carcass. This is dark for like a child to be writing. Probably 12, 14, I don't know. As you continue down the path, your heartbeat matches each and every thump echoing out of
Definitely
the woods.
before we could
This
drive.
hypnotic pulsation continues for almost 15 minutes and then ends abruptly. As you concentrate to see if the pounding is still there, you notice that all other sounds have ceased. There's no buzzing of bugs or chirping of crickets. There's complete silence, except for the beating of your own heart. And then there's this little paragraph that I have labeled talk to each person separately. And so to add kind of like mystique to the story right here, there's this party of 5 people that are hanging out in my room, but I took each of them separate outside of the room, and I read the same patches to them, but they don't know that. So they each think they kind of have like secret information, and sometimes you would. And so this passage goes, you think you can see some shadows at the edge of the path as you whip your head around to look, but you see nothing. Every once in a while, you hear the slight crack of a stick or twig or the rustle of some leaves, but nothing that couldn't have been caused by the wind or a small rodent of some type. You keep seeing shadows dance out along the edge of the path, but nothing ever leaves the confines of the dark woods, so you pass it off as actions of some small forest creature. And so then it's just open there. It's like, well, what does the party want to do? And now everyone was separated for a minute, and they're like, oh, what information should I get? What's happening? Like, do we want to go into the woods? Do we want to continue down the path? I think they were headed to some, they're just following a path right now with a caravan. Like, they don't know where the adventure is going. This was the very beginning, but
And
so that kind of just puts them in the
here's
mood
what
and
I
sets the scene.
here's what I think is interesting. So you just described, like, what you just handed over is a subset of information by which this group of people who are all agreeing to play this game together are going to proceed. And that to me is no fucking different than fantasy football. And so
No.
So here's the thing. If you
It's
just
not.
listened to what Brian was saying and you thought, oh my God, that's so ridiculously involved and pathetic and nerdy and whatever, and all the stuff that's like, I feel like the baggage I've carried around for years because of Dungeons and Dragons, like, realize that that's no different than fantasy football, which I feel like is completely accepted and okay for people to be way into. And it's why I don't judge fantasy football. I mean, we laugh about the effort that goes into it because it's not the effort that we would choose to use our time for right now. But it's no different. You're dealing with a subset of agreed upon rules with a certain
that are constantly changing,
degree of chance in it,
and discussed.
And you're doing a whole bunch of research to decide what your next move is, and you're hoping that you have information that the other people don't, and sometimes you do, sometimes you don't, and then you sort of go on this adventure. In fantasy football, it's the adventure of a season, and you guys getting to sit around and go, oh man, and then he broke his leg, which completely fucks me. I hate this. You know? But like I had
Or he failed his saving throw and the dragon fire burnt through his shield and he died.
exactly.
Same
I
thing.
mean, no, and
you know?
I had a character, I had a thing, and this is like, you can try to think about this, what it would be for you if fantasy football is your thing. But like, we had an adventure that I really distinctly remember where I was playing this wizard, which was my go-to character for a long time. And I think you were DMing and you were just kind of over it. So you were just like, okay, I'm going to throw a beast at these guys. It's just going to end the mission so we can go outside and play Frisbee. And I had just gotten a spell that like I was allowed to use, but on really shaky grounds because it was the most advanced spell that I had for my level.
Yeah,
as a
this is coming
wizard.
back to me now.
And it's called Chain Lightning. And it was a spell where the
Yeah.
strength of the spell was the lightning could bounce off a wall and hit the guy repeatedly with one cast. And basically it was like, okay, I have one chance before this guy takes a swing at me and kills me. I'm going to try this Chain Lightning spell. And then by an unbelievably fortuitous set of rolls for the bounces, this one cast bounced off the wall and hit him again like 6 times, and he died. And I got so much like experience points and reward gold and different gear from this guy that you guys then wouldn't let me play the wizard like
He was too strong.
ever again, because it made it not fun for you guys because I was too strong. I could see too much. I could kill too many things. I was too charismatic.
Which rolls us
Like,
strangely right into like modern socioeconomic issues in the world, you know? The people in charge, luck in some capacity played a role in someone becoming too powerful, having too much
well,
too many
so here's
resources.
but so here's the
made
thing.
it unbalanced that made the game unfun.
In
for
the
people.
fantasy football context, think about Tom Brady. You know, I mean, you don't follow football a
Too
lot,
good
but you know who
looking,
Tom Brady is,
too
right?
good at football.
If you had Tom Brady the season that he was backup quarterback to Drew Bledsoe, and Bledsoe hurt himself, and Tom Brady got put in and has never been taken back out, that's the same functional equivalent. But it's completely okay, I think, socially, for you to have a story about the season that you picked the backup quarterback on the Patriots and it turned out to be Tom Brady and you won your whole league because it turned out to be Tom Brady. But like, if I tell this story about killing a skeleton in a cave with my wizard, I'm a loser. And so it's just,
people,
you know, my thing is,
people just don't have that frame of reference.
it's just gameplay.
You know,
It's like, and that was the depth of research that you might have had to do, you know. And I don't know, I think Tom Brady was a college star and stuff. So he's like, you could have done your research enough to know that like, as soon as this guy gets a shot, he's going to be the guy. I mean, I don't really know enough about Tom Brady, right? But that's a great example of like 100 to 1 shot turns out to be your moneymaker. And you're going to tell that story forever. The same way that I still remember this ridiculous story from like 7th grade about
it's exciting.
You know,
what an exciting thing to have a game do, you know? I can't think of any specific memories of board games where the thing that occurs in the board game is so exciting. Like you're playing Sorry and maybe you roll a 6 when you needed a 6 exactly to get to the end spot and win the game, but
it's like,
there's only so much excitement. That's like very localized excitement in your life, you know?
Well, and so
just passing the time.
It's and again, it's another place where role playing stacks up with fantasy sports, because like that guy breaks his leg and he's out for the season. He's out for the season. You don't get to replace him. And the way we used to play, like if my wizard died, I had to start with a new junior character the next time we played.
Yeah.
Like I didn't get to resurrect that wizard for the next thing.
Yeah.
There were no, at least the way we played.
Sometimes we went on resurrection adventures, I think.
But other people take it really seriously to the point of like, your guy dies and he's done. You got to start with a new.
It's just it's up to that group and what they decide the rules of that world are at that time.
And so compared to Lou, we played pretty casually, I think. But it's a really interesting sort of like, I think, to try to take it to a much broader, you know, point about imagination and games and things like that. Like it seems like people have always come up with that kind of thing and always strived for this sort of like, let's tell a story, let's go on an adventure, let's watch a movie, let's watch a TV show. And interesting seeing that there was this thing that like, I mean, we literally, we had teachers who tried to get Dungeons and Dragons outlawed because it was
It was
heretical.
powerful. It was incredibly polarizing. We had teachers that were we had groups of teachers. We played at school a lot, like during. I mean, it was so engaging. I think most of the people in our graduating high school class, but we went to school with the same people for a really long time.
At least
Probably half our
tried.
class at some point played Dungeons and Dragons with us, and we would run from class to go get more books and meet in the AV room in the library and read books and play this fantasy game together. And so we were just running around campus talking about dragons and spells, and it was polarizing. We had groups of teachers. There were meetings that the faculty would get together and
Sometimes
talk
we would
about.
go and defend it.
Right. What some thought it was bad, some thought it was distracting, some thought it was incredible. Um, it was just it was wild. What a wild thing to have a group of children just creating this fantasy world inside of doing all the other stuff that you do at school.
Right.
It was incredible.
Well, and that even goes to like violent video games, right? People talk about concern for violent video games. Like we were
Yeah.
making this stuff up from nothing and it was violent.
It's for sure, and it's for sure fair to say that Dungeons and Dragons could had violent pieces to it. I mean, there's death and dying and burning people alive, stabbing people with swords. It's incredibly violent, you know. But that's it always felt to me like a very, not that I was thinking about it from this context as a child, but it feels like that was a very gentle and correct way to learn that stuff. I mean, you had to think through when your character died. You felt bad. Sometimes you would do things in the game that would result in bad things happening, another person's character dying, and you would think about that. That had an emotional effect on you.
And in that sense, it's more
Really.
engaging than your standard sort of. I mean, and books, movies are the same way. That's why they have the same impact, right? But in this sense, like it was a way of putting yourself in there where in a lesser way than you actually dying. Like there are real in your life, real implications for your character dying. Now you got to start with this junior guy and you got to like the questions you ask have to be different because you might not have the like, and you can hop in with your same party, but now all those guys are going to be experienced and you got to, now your question is back to like, hey, can you pick that lock for me? Cause I'm not going to be able to do it. And I know that your numbers are such that you'll have a more beneficial role. Like, and that's a hassle if you used to be the powerful ass wizard that could just go, I'm going to use the unlock spell. We're done here.
It's sobering for you as a character.
It's
neat. So we're segueing, I think, really well into where I think we should kind of go next, which is what are sort of the tangible what are our thoughts on the tangible benefits of the game, kind of education and learning and experience. And I mean, personally, I think we could touch on every aspect of character and personal development and talk about how the game kind of influenced that. But what are some big ones?
I think the biggest thing for
when you
me,
think
and
about
this
it?
is the same thing with open world video games or any sort of puzzle game, Tetris, even a simple iPad game where you walk a robot around and you try to figure out what the problem you're supposed to solve is. Like it's a valuable thing in the real world to have a certain degree of broader problem solving skills, to be able to just go, I'm standing here at a tree with a poster on it. And what questions do I need to ask? First off, I mean, and this goes to what I think we want this whole podcast to be about, right? Like, we've talked about it in design context and science context, but there's a real world reason to have a systematic approach to like, okay, what are the questions I ask to get more information about the scenario? So I think it's important from the standpoint of experiences like that are how you learn how to have a broader way of approaching a problem that starts from what questions do I need to ask? What are the answers to those questions? How do I respond to those questions? And in a role-playing sense, and in a more pared down way across video games, like what you're learning is, well, how do I start from this subset of constraints and proceed constructively? Scientific method in a sense.
Great, very
right?
well put. I like that wrap up there. Yeah, Yeah, interesting. And so much stuff can be approached looking at what's going on and looking at everyone's inputs. And there are a lot of places I would go to answer that question, but along those same lines, I really think that the social creative interaction was really valuable. It taught you how to get together with a group of people and be creative as a team and talk about how things worked. And you had rules, but it wasn't rules like Monopoly. You can't argue over if it's $200 for pass and go, it's always $200 for pass and go. In Dungeons and Dragons, it was constraints, like you said, more so than rules. It was concepts to consider as you collaborated and coordinated and compromised on stuff as you created this world together.
There's this inherently collaborative and cooperative component that exists in some video games, but largely gets stripped away because it's a thing that's
Mm-hmm.
really hard to do, to cooperate like that. And so if you're
Mm-hmm.
trying to pare down the sticking points in something like this so that you can make it more addictive and sell it, one of the things they take out is cooperation. You can play the game by yourself against the computer and still have that satisfaction of achievement. But with role-playing games, you really have to cooperate to exist in this universe. And it's sort of like this exaggerated game of yes and, which is a thing that improv people practice, where you just have to go, yeah, okay, and then you add stuff. Because if you're
And
the guy that
podcasters
goes,
try to
no, you
also.
can't do that. And the interesting thing with role-playing games is, like, video games constrain that by just saying there are things you can do, there are things you can't do, and then there are things that you do and they're just not productive. Like, you could go shoot off into the breeze in Metal Gear Solid, you're just going to run out of bullets and then it hurts you and whatever. Like, in role-playing games, part of the dungeon master's job was to, if you are trying to do stupid shit, to, like, jam you up. Like, to go, okay, well, if you want to draw another dick on that poster, you're running out of space on the paper. I'm going to triple the difficulty of whether or not you get to, there's room on that paper. And now you have to roll and you're not going to get it. And if you do happen to get it, that you get to draw another dick and everybody thinks it's funny. And you go, I'm going to draw another dick. And then he goes, okay, but now it's up to 5 times difficulty. And eventually he jams you up. You can't do the thing and you can't be stupid anymore. And if you keep trying to do that shit, people stop inviting you to their sessions.
I don't remember there being a success roll on the Dungeon Master screen for drawing obscene pictures on posters, but maybe it needs it. Maybe it needs to be updated.
Just make that shit up. But no, I think it's a valuable, but here's where I think we get to a moral for the whole thing, which is, I think a lot of people play fantasy sports and there's that same degree of cooperation, because to sit down and have a draft and make it happen, y'all have to cooperate. And to play a co-op video game, you have to cooperate, or you have to even cooperate with the computer or whatever. And you have to problem solve. And in all of those places, I think the idea of, like, I don't know, you could call it, I think there's a concept called mindful gaming. You should check her out. She's on podcast. She's got books. Jane McGonigal is her name.
Jane McGonigal.
She has done, like, PhD level research in the value of gaming, which is like, go play Tetris for its value from distracting you from waiting in your doctor's office, but try to be mindful of the value of that experience. Like, oh, I had this problem and I could solve it. Like, what was the feeling of having the problem and how did I feel? And then how did I find the solution for that? And it exists in games at any varying degree of complexity, but, like, there's real value in that game. Like, for us with the role playing, it was, what you just said about the cooperation and what I was saying about the problem solving. And then we took that into our life. And I really distinctly remember, now that you brought it up, a context where we were defending against, like, teachers who wanted to tell us that we couldn't play on campus. And we were sitting there going, no, it's about cooperation and it's about imagination and it's about all of the stuff that we just talked about. And it's stuff that we all carry into our life. And I remember Mrs. Knox, the librarian, basically standing up in the face of these teachers and being like, these are all good guys. And everything they said about carrying all of that stuff into their regular life is absolutely true, and I see them every day.
She was like the supreme white wizard.
Oh yeah, she was an awesome supporter of our continued use of the back corner of the library for Dungeons and Dragons.
We had to sign up for the AV room all the time. It was just us and then a bunch of teachers signing up during teacher periods.
Either way, the thing was, I think we didn't think about it mindfully, but we carried that into normal life because it was like we would sit in a room as friends, and we're all still friends, the people that used to play that game. And I think a lot of it comes from like, even when we're being dickheads to one another, there's still this thing of like, we built an ability to cooperate that we literally use to this day to make this podcast better every episode. Yeah. And sometimes that's like, dude, you say too much. You know, like, and it's like, okay, yeah. But I think we learned that cooperation from that kind of role playing. And the thing that I guess I want to put out there for everyone else listening is, even if you're just playing Metal Gear, like, try to think of it as more than just dominating at Metal Gear and being better. Like, try to take that feeling of problem solving and that feeling of like, I'm not sure where to go now, but I think I go over here, and then if I go over there, I can find the guy and I can stab him silently. Like, that feeling of, I just solved the shit out of this problem. Like, take that into your daily life instead of just kind of bumping your head against things willy-nilly when you're out there trying to talk to people about a concept, or talk to your wife about the mess in the garage, or, you know, whatever. Like, that, I think, is the value of all that kind of stuff.
So here's a good kind of wrap-up question for you. People often, after I talk to them about Dungeons and Dragons and kind of explain some of the stuff we've talked about now, they say, cool, can we play sometime? And my answer is always, not really. It's so involved to get into it that I don't know how to engage you. I don't know how we would play.
Right. To really get into it on a level.
It would take me days to set up a game. It would take you days to even learn the basics of creating a character and get involved. And so I've thought a lot recently about how could I occasionally capture something like that as an adult with more time. Are there games like that? Is there a way people could be introduced to a little bit of Dungeons and Dragons? Could we do an hour one night with people who are interested?
I honestly, my answer is, I don't know. And I hope that there are listeners who maybe do, and they can tell us. I know there are weekly games at comic book shops and games shops around town and stuff. But like, one of the things that I think was fun and made it accessible was playing with my friends. And I know that eventually I would get to be friends with the people at those places, but like, I don't have time in my life, and I think this is true for most people, to go make a whole bunch of new friends that take this stuff really seriously and hang out at a games workshop, you know, every Sunday. Mm-hmm. I don't know that I have an answer. There might be video games I'm missing that kind of tap into this. There might be something that we could come up with as a community that would be fun to do.
Yeah. I would love to figure out how to capture the value of Dungeons and Dragons and the creative collaboration and turn it into a cocktail party game. It doesn't need to be dwarves and wizards, but it could be the same sort of self-guided or team-guided creation of interesting. It's kind of like having conversation with people. But there's some sort of like pride in putting together the world and teaming up and overcoming obstacles, and that seems like some sort of game that could be developed and broadened. Because like we've talked about with fantasy sports, there's a lot of these same desires are in people to be someone else and to create things and run things and control your own destiny in a as a person that isn't your day-to-day person.
With that element of chance where you're rolling dice and it's still fun. And I think there's board games like that. Like, I think there's tabletop games that are that way. But the answer is, I don't know what they are. And if you guys know, tell us.
Yeah, hit us up with some other games that you've played, maybe that are slightly less burdensome.
I also fear that if the people that know may have already checked out of this podcast, because they may not need to know everything that we just explained about.
Oh, they're off playing Dungeons and Dragons rather than listening to other people talk about it.
Like the yogurt in the first episode.
You'll be eating yogurt
while I'm thinking about it.
I know at least
Um,
one person who was prompted to buy yogurt on the way home, frozen yogurt, after listening to our first
Outstanding. Maybe
podcast.
that should be our first sponsor.
Ooh,
But no, so I really like if you want to get something like this going, maybe we can figure it out. I don't know.
cool.
If you know of something like this, let us know. We're on all the socials, mostly at Zengineering Pod, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all that stuff,
What's our website? Zengineeringpodcast.com.
and Zengineeringpodcast.com. That's it.
Nice.
Best thing you can do to help us out though is go write a review, go give us a ranking on iTunes.
iTunes.
A lot of the
Yeah.
places where you might have gotten this, Downcast, Overcast, they all pull from iTunes, and so their rankings are all
Everything,
based
I
on
think.
iTunes also.
Yeah, that'd be great. Just leave us some feedback there too. It's a good place to get in touch.
But yeah, thanks for hanging out for another one of these. And
Oh yeah.
I'm Adam.
Brian. Let's keep the rock rolling.
They don't know what I know.
I have a PS I want to hit that just came to me at like the same time that weird comment just came out. We should have been a hit list topic. I wanted to discuss the D4, which is the 4-sided die from Dungeons and Dragons.
The pyramid.
The pyramid. It's the most interesting die to me because every other die rolls just like a 6-sided die. You roll it and then you read the number that's on top.
Right.
But when you hand a 4-sided die, often referred to as a D4 in the manuals, and give it to people, they roll it and they say, huh? What's the number? Because their number is just all over every side and there's no number
Right.
on top.
It's real confusing.
How
But
did-
there is a number
did
on
it work?
top. It's just that the number that encircles the spire, right? That's how you read it?
Yeah. Some are the spire, some are the base. But yeah, you have
So
to read a number
confusing.
that shows up on all 3 sides. And it's cool because it not only are Dungeons and Dragons dice amazing geometry, another place Dungeons and Dragons touches mathematics and science. You got the dodecahedron is the D20, the 20-sided die that defines most of the luck in the game, the classic iconic piece that I have on a pair of dress socks. But the D4 is a geometric pattern that you can't produce in our reality in a 3-dimensional world. You can't make a 4-sided thing that has a top face when it lands on a flat surface. And so there had to be this creative way to roll 4 sides and get a number.
You can't make a 4-sided die with a top face for the same reason that you can't stack 4 cans in the fridge in a geometrically satisfying fashion. Call back. Okay, let's get out of here. Thanks for listening.
Awesome, buddy.
Everybody.
Good cast, people.
We'll
Take
check you
care.
next week.